Welcome to HotTakes, the Hotwire podcast. I'm Sarah Kalhorn, your host for this episode. I am the Vice President of our Industrial Technology practice, which is focused on technology that makes, powers, or moves. At Hotwire, we are a global tech communications consultancy. The HotTakes podcast is an opportunity for us to talk to industry leaders and innovators about current trends, how to stay relevant during this very unique time that we are in, and provide some insights on how to connect with your customers and the market at large. Today we have two guests joining us, both of whom wear a lot of hats. So I'll do my best to intro them and then let them refute or add anything when I'm done with my little spiel. I'll start with Keith. Keith Larson is a communicator and a publisher. He is the group publisher of Putnam Media's automation group, which includes media brands like Control Design, and Smart Industry. That means he has to run the business of those brands and be a businessman, but he is still very much a reporter, as he is the editor-in-chief of Control and the editor-at-large of Smart Industry, which is both a media outlet and an annual conference. Did that happen this year?
Until this year. It was supposed to happen right in the run-up to April Fool's Day. So guess who's the fool? I'm done. We did successfully turn it into a webinar series, but hopefully we'll live to fight another day.
Nicely done. One of the first then probably to make that transition.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Everyone was having to do. And that event is focused on accelerating digital transformation across industries. And lastly, Keith is the Vice President of Content, responsible for strategic content direction across even more Putnam Media B2B brands, including chemical processing, food processing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and plant services. Keith started down this road as a chemical engineer at Amoco Chemicals, and he is with us today from Chicago. Welcome, Keith. What did I mess up? What did I screw up?
Pleasure to be here. I wish I would just jettison a few of those responsibilities, but I think you covered everything pretty exhaustively. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
And next we have Steven Freedman. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you.
Steven is the global head of Hoistway Information Systems, the business for CEDES AG, a Swiss company that is the global leader in 3D technology within the field of sensors. I will make Steven get into what that means for us non-engineers in our day-to-day lives in a moment. Prior to that, he was the president of the North America business for CEDES AG. And prior to joining CEDES 12 years ago, he ran the North American Safety Sensors division at SICK, a leader in scanners, laser scanners. He has co-founded or invested in several companies in industrial sensing, and he came to the field of industrial sensing rather non-traditionally, starting off as a professional musician, finding he might need to make some money, and then becoming a stockbroker, finding he didn't need money that bad, and then becoming a laser and industrial sensing technologist. So
yeah,
Steve,
the traditional, path that everybody takes, from musician to stockbroker to, industrial sensing. It's the normal boy meets girl story. It's
all right. So tell us, indulge us. What does 3D technology and sensing mean for the average listener?
Yeah. So if you think about how you think about today's world, where you have autonomous vehicles being talked about a lot, they want to see the world in 3D, right? So it's not seeing something like on a sheet of paper, but seeing it in full 3 dimensions. And so part of my background is in photonics imaging, 3D imaging. So photonics semiconductor technology, where you're actually capturing light and not just capturing colors like you would on a photograph, but using that light that you're capturing to measure distance. So you get distance per pixel as opposed to a color per pixel, and you create an image out of that is a distance image as opposed to, let's say, a visible image like you're used to seeing. So capturing that type of technology and using that in real-world applications is what I've spent most of my career doing.
So that is literally capturing the human being walking down the street as the car, recognizing it's a human and how far it is, and being able to adjust.
Correct. One of many, many ways you can apply that. Yes.
Got it. All right. So this is going to work a little bit differently today because one of our guests, Keith, is also a professionally trained interrogator. Having lived his life as a reporter, he's not used to having the tables entirely turned. So I'll be asking questions. Keith will be asking questions. Steven, you're welcome to ask questions, but not expected to. That's totally up to you.
Stop me.
Awesome. So our first topic we want to get into is what is this pandemic doing to industrial innovation? And I'll kick this off with a question, sort of in general, in what we are seeing across enterprises is a rapid acceleration in digital transformation. With employees becoming remote and working from home, we've seen more digital transformation in the last quarter than we've seen in the previous decade. But it's not necessarily the same for industrial operators, from manufacturing to distribution centers to oil fields, where they don't have exactly that same opportunity or trajectory. So I want to hear from you guys what you're seeing in terms of the pandemic's impact on industrial companies and how they invest in digitization or don't. And I'll start with you, Steve, since you run a business, an industrial business, and hear what you have to say about that. And then Keith, would love to hear what you're sort of seeing from the myriad of leaders across industries you speak to every day.
Yeah, it's not a simple question, in that I think a lot of companies are dealing with more than one challenge at the same time. One, a lot of businesses have been negatively impacted, so they're seeing reduced cash flows. That, of course, means they want to invest less, typically. Smart businesses, of course, try to invest in these times. But at the same time, they're forced to rethink their workflows. So, how do you remove the human contact from your daily business processes? How do you remove human contact to surfaces in whatever let's say production facility you're doing, whatever distribution center that you may be working in. So you really have to rethink a lot of process. Now, in truth, I think a lot of companies are trying to figure it out. I don't think anybody's gotten it down yet. I think there's a lot of investigation, a lot of discussion. Maybe one of the best things I think that's come out of this is the people that were the token transformation and digitization executives who have gotten positions because it was necessary to have the optics of having one, are finally actually getting an ear in the C-suite or with their executives, and they're actually being taken seriously. And I think that's going to have a big impact. I know you said that a lot of transformation has really taken place. I don't know if I've considered forcing everyone to work from home and jumping on Teams or Skype or Zoom or whatever as actual transformation. It's forced a lot of people to rethink processes and fight their way through. I think transformation will, in the good companies, come out of it, but I think that's yet to be seen.
So all this switching to the cloud and Slack and everything might just revert as soon as we're allowed back in our offices.
There's going to be people who are going to, or companies, I should say, that really have found better ways of working, reducing costs, improving process through this. Mm-hmm. And there's others that are going to struggle through it, and it just mm-hmm. isn't going to work with their corporate culture. And I think there are people that will revert back, and there are others that are going to find good tools and good process improvements that can hopefully stay with them for the long term. But I don't think it's clear for any company yet what the new normal is going to be.
You said something interesting. You said that the sort of token digital transformation executives finally have some sort of social capital to use.
Yeah, I apologize to all those people out there who may have taken pride in their job before. You can really do it now.
Yeah. So do you feel like that was sort of an innovation washing at a corporate level, and now we're seeing those folks really get to, I don't know, Keith, have you talked to any of those people that you've said feel empowered or are making real moves?
I mean, I talked to a lot of them that were actually doing important things before, and I do think it's stuff that was already going on. They just needed to put a label on that. They were maybe innovation directors or things before, but now it was digital transformation was the fashionable title. But I do think it has been a bit of a double-edged sword. Been seeing a lot of, let me say, accelerated but very focused innovation, I guess, in the automation space that I've been following. Very much focused around facilitating remote work, not just work from home, but for collaboration for deskless workers that are out in the field, maybe need some help. They may be generalists and they may need some help calibrating a transmitter or doing some maintenance activity. But looking at some of those augmented reality type tools, big uptake in adoption rate, I think, for those, and more focus on front-ending some of the technologies with those kind of tools certainly has been part of it. It's been a big shot in the arm for cybersecurity businesses as well, because obviously if you're going to have all these people dialing in from home, and a regular office environment is a different thing than a refinery. Okay, I'm at home and I can actually turn valves at the refinery. You want to make sure that thing is damn secure, and that's been an acceleration of taking care of some other, I guess, foundational cybersecurity things that maybe have been neglected or were kind of put off. Nothing's happened yet, and all of a sudden that stuff, now that you've got so many more people can't come to the plant dialing in remotely, you've really got to get that button down. So that certainly has been taken care of. Some of the foundational elements that needed to be done before we could do the real work of transformation, maybe post-COVID.
Yeah.
So just
and remote diagnostics has been something that's been desirable in the past, and all of a sudden became required, right? So it went from a nice to have, let's figure out how we do it right, to, oh dear, we have to have it tomorrow. Mm-hmm. How do we do it securely? Well, in some cases we don't, but we have to do it anyway, which creates obvious, economic and business risk.
But no doubt about it.
Companies are scrambling.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we also are seeing a huge uptick in cyber attacks because of the pandemic, taking advantage of that and taking advantage of these, if you're a refinery worker and you're on your home computer, you might also be shopping and clicking on your email and all of that horrifying stuff happening. Both of you have sort of said that you are seeing companies just have to make those moves anyway. And Keith, you mentioned that they're actually having to then relook at that foundational stuff. So now that's a lot of investment in time and money to get there.
It's one of the things that they can't not do.
Yeah, can't not do.
But it's also one that's an investment that to their customers, to their shareholders, to their stakeholders seems invisible. It's a large number from a dollar standpoint and a human resource standpoint. And it creates a lot of additional work effort and process change, but it doesn't generate an obvious benefit. And that's a struggle for some companies to justify.
Yeah. Well, I think in this case, there's been, obviously, really no choice about making those investments, because if they've, look at some of the meatpacking companies that had the very, very, very headline-worthy COVID-19 outbreaks. So really have to be able to enforce those kind of social distancing type of things if you're going to take safety seriously. Yeah.
All right. So we did see just some numbers come out this week about, at least for manufacturing, some good June numbers. How are people looking at investment? Like, the economy's in the toilet. We have a great month. Is it going to be in the toilet again next month? There's just no visibility. There's no unprecedented uncertainty. So in terms of investment, there's some of this crisis stuff that we have to do. It's happening now. It's happening now. Where else is investment going if you do have a good month and you're able to get a little bit behind you or make investors or executives feel okay? Where do you think people are spending that non-crisis investment money?
Yeah, I don't see investment as month by month type of topic typically. It's usually you decide to do it and you make the investment, and it's a longer term, let's say, strategy. I do see quite a few companies trying to capitalize as quickly as possible on the how do I make something touchless? So look at an elevator button, for example, or a door handle to a bathroom, a public restroom. These are things that are high touch surfaces that people are now worried about. And of course, there's companies that are very quickly trying to make these little handle grabbers or button pushers for you. But more importantly, the companies that make those are looking at how do we do touchless interface for our customers, or how do we all of a sudden start investing in automatic doors in our buildings if I'm managing a facility for a bathroom, rather than having to force people to touch it every time they go through. So there is a short-term investment in those types of things. But there's also I'll call it a window of opportunity problem. I think initially there was a lot of companies who said there's a very short window of opportunity where there's a market demand or market awareness that there's a need for these kinds of investments, but we think it's short, so let's move super fast. And now as this prolongs and as people foresee the potential for real systemic change, or these things to occur again in the future, or public acceptance of tracking and tracing and other things, sensing in the environment, that I think that people start seeing now there's a longer term play and they can take a deep breath and put a longer term strategy in place.
I think I'm also seeing companies that are pivoting to really focus some of their efforts into things that will not only be useful during this COVID crisis, but continue to be applicable afterwards. So one example is, I was just writing up the other day, Siemens has a pre-existing solution called RLTS, real-time location, or RTLS, real-time location services for tracking equipment and other things around manufacturing environments, almost like an indoor kind of GPS that really localizes equipment. And then they also have real-time digital twins for doing simulation modeling of processes. So they've recently launched what they're calling a next normal type of application, where they're using the real-time locating systems to monitor social distancing among factory employees. So you've got a little badge that flashes when you get too close to somebody, to violate within 6 feet. And you've also got the ability to say, okay, let's run a simulation of the plant, including where people move, and see where choke points are perhaps, or violations, frequent violations in social distancing, and redo our layouts accordingly. So rolling that out to the market as something that will not only help optimize the safety while optimizing production, but once that infrastructure is in place, you can do a lot of other things to optimize workflows and stuff longer term. So I think that's the ideal solutions are, okay, let's invest in things that we need to get through this, to deal with the COVID situation, but more ideally, make investments in infrastructure technologies that help us do things on into the future that'll make operations more optimal. That makes sense.
That's such a cool example.
And I think that infrastructure investment is going to go beyond contract tracing and monitoring people and how close they come. I think that's a obvious first step that everyone's taking, but I'm starting to see a lot of interest and investment in the area of pre-screening. So you take the case of a work environment where you've got 1,000 workers coming into a facility, having them pre-screened. You see already some of that for temperature, but let's say for other vital signatures or vital signs, to pre-screen their health against basically a known baseline, even measuring them every day. Maybe their temperature tends to run hot. It doesn't mean they're sick, but if it's 2 degrees above their normal, whatever that is, then it may be a sign. Maybe monitoring the respiration and their heart rate and other things, just to see before they enter the facility. And I think that becomes really important when we talk about large public spaces, talk about theaters or stadiums or airports. No one's buying tickets to go smush up against their neighbors in a major concert right now. But if you knew that everybody was being pre-screened before they came in, and a lot of eliminating that risk was happening, I think people would be much more ready to buy a ticket, to go in and to be there. And that's going to be critical for keeping some of those businesses operational. It's true for sports. It's true for a lot of things.
Yeah, no doubt. I think even your former employee or former employer, SICK, has pivoted to deploy some 3-dimensional scanner technologies to monitor entryways and things like that, to see how many people are coming in and out of a building, or monitoring social distancing as well. So yeah, it's really just it's the same sensor they've always had, but it's different firmware downloaded into these sensors. So it's a neat pivot and the neat ability that speaks to really the capabilities.
Well, that is very interesting. First of all of this seems like really good news, essentially, for your company, for all this industrial sensing. CEDES, this is talk about investing in infrastructure. You guys are part of all of that. But this is interesting that we're seeing some of this infra that was used for industrial environments exclusively coming into sports arenas and all these other things, and sort of infiltrating the consumer world in a way. I got screened for temperature as I came in today. And I would love it if I also heard there was other things happening to everyone who came in to understand just how they might be. So anything else, you guys gave a few really cool examples, and those are some of my favorite things to hear. Anything else you've seen that you've been like, that's really a rad like application and or new technology or just another pivot? I love those stories about how companies are making that change. And I know we've only had a few months, but people who are making change and seeing some success already.
There's one that I think is kind of interesting is there are some automotive companies that are looking very heavily right now at monitoring the health of the driver. It started actually with an investment that was made or started a few years ago in monitoring for things like, is a child left behind in the seat? So mom moves the car in a hot day, she's flustered, tired because she's been up feeding all night, whatever the reason is, and baby's left behind. So there are some regulations going into effect in different countries for monitoring for that in one way or another. But it led to things like, how do we monitor the health of the driver? Now you start adding autonomous vehicle let's say functionality, or at least advanced driver assist, if not autonomous, depending on what level of autonomy you talk about. If the driver is having a heart attack or he's sick with, driving himself to the hospital and becomes incapacitated, now the vehicle can safely pull itself over to the shoulder and the vehicle can call for help. So a lot of these technologies that are being driven for one reason or another because of the pandemic are getting extra attention. Because health or continuous monitoring is becoming more acceptable, and the health of individuals in an environment is something that people want to monitor on a regular basis as innocuously as possible. It should be invisible to people, but I think it's going to be a constant in our daily lives in the near, not so distant future.
And Keith, I think you had a cool example too that was on the edge of your tongue.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the interesting applications that we've seen is if you think of a typical control room in a chemical plant or refinery, something like that. You've got these consoles where people have to sit and push the buttons and monitor everything, make sure everything works okay. But all of a sudden, you can't sit next to each other anymore. So all of a sudden, you've got to space out the operators more than it was designed for. So Honeywell is one of the companies that had put together, they've had many years of experience doing remote operations. So setting up a remote operations center that would be, somewhere connected through private networks. But it was often a highly engineered system, very custom, took months to set up. So what they did is they took some of that capability and streamlined it, limited the options and the functionality, and now you can actually get that up and running in days, a remote center instead of months. And that's really the dramatic shift in the amount of time. So now they're seeing that more companies that are not used to doing remote operations, doing it, chemical plants, even food and beverage, pharmaceutical plants that are typically used to having people there, are using this technology. So it's something.
Are they setting it up in people's homes?
In some cases, yes, but a lot of times all they need to do is have another control center, maybe in another building where they can spread out, take half the people and put them across the street in another building. But still, all that connectivity, all those things have to be made sure they're rock solid, tested 100% and certified, which used to take months by the time they did all the custom configuration. But now they've got a kind of a canned remote access.
Remote op.
It cuts the costs, it cuts startup time. I mean, it's a win-win all around in that case. So I thought that was a neat one when you're talking about orders of magnitude in terms of time and effort. That's huge.
We've talked a lot about product innovation and innovation within your own company in terms of being safer and changing processes. But I think one of the big things we've seen also is the struggle of the complexity of our supply chains, and the pandemic really testing that. And a lot of industrial companies have the biggest footprint sort of globally in terms of having not just people, but facilities all over, and supply chains all over. Have you seen any sort of moves by, these companies also tend to speak the least. They tell us the least about what they're doing because they don't have to tell consumers anything. Yeah. So have you seen or heard any companies that have we were seeing a huge uptick in supply chain technology and visibility and trying to understand where things are so they can redirect things at any given point. But have you heard of new or innovative ways of data sharing across partnerships since the pandemic started? Because certainly I would assume that people are more open to it than they've ever been.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that I've seen more sharing of data. I mean, there's still that reluctance to share, very proprietary. I mean, it's same as we are in our personal lives of sharing data. It's got to be a very, very specific reason. But I do think one of the things that we're seeing is over the last 20 years, I mean, so much focus on optimizing supply chains and refining them to get every bit of efficiency out of them. And I think some of that has been kind of shown to be a false economy in some ways, because I think we're looking at manufacturers who were kind of left high and dry when their supply chain broke, looking more into supply chain resiliency versus efficiency, so that you have perhaps multiple sources of the same component that you can rely on in different regions, those kind of things. So a little bit of a step back to say, hey, just because it's less expensive to have this one supplier, that's maybe not such a good idea. So just something that I'm getting a sense of. I don't know that I've got any particular people to point at, but that certainly is a Uber sentiment, I guess.
And I would agree. I don't think there's been a lot of data sharing amongst the supply chain. I think companies recognize even more than consumers the value of the data that they have, and they're more conscious of letting it out. Maybe an opportunity, by the way, for another investment somewhere to think about, but I don't think you've seen it. I think I can say in our case, we benefited strangely from the impact of some of the tariffs that have been put in place with China, because it forced us at that point to actually look at other parts of our supply chain ahead of time, and allowed us to have multiple sources where we, in some cases, didn't before, so that we could bring in materials from China to certain countries, but maybe not into the U.S. We bring them in from Eastern Europe, depending on the type of component.
So the experience with the tariffs gave you more flexibility for the pandemic.
In a strange way, yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to say the tariffs were a good or bad thing. I'm not picking that topic up on this podcast.
Made you flex before you had to flex even harder.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you both so much for joining us today. This was, I could keep going all afternoon. And thank you to everyone who is listening. If you want more information about industrial innovation, read every single one of Keith's magazines. Follow Steven and Keith on LinkedIn. Check out what CEDES is doing at www.cedes.com. And if you have more questions about how industrial companies can and should communicate about their innovation, please visit hotwireglobal.com. We will have new episodes with industry leaders coming soon, so sign up for Hot Takes on our website. Thank you so much.